sequestered away somewhere in early Christian and Gnostic thought, a provocative and enigmatic being known as Yaldabaoth resides. Regarded by many Gnostic sects as the malevolent creator of the material world, Yaldabaoth stands in stark contrast to the benevolent, transcendent god of Orthodox Christianity. Often depicted as a lion-faced serpent or a blind, arrogant being known as the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth embodies ignorance, hubris, and cosmic tyranny. His story is one of rebellion, deception, and perhaps what one might call the ultimate pretension. Yet once you know of such a tale, it's hard to unknow it, if you know what I mean. You see, the Gnostic narrative is so diabolically critical of the biblical narrative that it might very well give even the most devout believer some pause. To put it simply, God is evil, according to this story. That is to say, the biblical God found in the Old Testament is evil, or was at least an impostor, who had usurped a power he had no right wielding, and illegitimately used that power to create the very world we know today, the material world. Emerging from such texts as the Apocryphon of John and other Nag Hammadi scriptures, Yaldabaoth becomes not just a theological figure, but a symbol of flawed power structures and spiritual alienation. He is both the aggressor and the victim, and though we see him do some incredibly messed up stuff in these Gnostic accounts, the question remains as to whether this is a malevolent creature playing at being God, or if this is the antics of a juvenile infant god that simply didn't know any better. Today we'll explore the mythos surrounding Yaldabaoth, examining his origins, attributes, and the philosophical implications of his role within Gnostic cosmology. Through this exploration, we will consider how ancient Gnostic thinkers used the figure of Yaldabaoth to challenge dominant religious narratives and to seek a hidden, liberating truth beyond the physical veil of the world. Yahweh was not a merciful, benevolent, and kind deity, but actually a wicked one. For what deity would bring such terrible plagues upon a people and then encourage his followers to celebrate it? With such imagery, it wouldn't have been beyond the ancient Hellenized Egyptians, who had already discerned much similarity between Yahweh, Set, and Typhon, to have begun viewing the Jewish god as this monstrous serpentine beast that roared like a lion and brought with it nothing but chaos and destruction. This, amongst some scholars, is believed to be the origins of the entity Yaldabaoth, and the basis by which Gnostics cultivated their own belief about the Jewish god Yahweh as something far more deceptive and wicked than even the Egyptians dared to do. As an early Christian sect, believed to originate from the end of the 1st century, Gnosticism held some weight amongst various communities. In fact, it had enough traction to warrant the attention of early church father Irenaeus, who dedicated a lot of his efforts to stamping out the belief system and labelling its practitioners as puffed up with conceit and self-importance. These people, these Gnostics, viewed Christianity in a dramatically different light, whereby they chose not to focus their efforts in worshipping an overarching, omnipotent deity, but rather in the pursuit of spiritual knowledge and the divine spark found within. What's more, these Gnostics had a very different idea as to who was actually in charge. Gnosticism presents us with the idea that there was a principal ultimate god who had effectively created everything, but that no one could know him in the way that traditional Christianity suggested. Instead, this being was merely a distant creator, who had, funnily enough, created the universe and the aeons, or the angels, but wasn't actually responsible for creating us. Instead, this was the work of a more wayward demiurge, a being that had unlawfully created the material world, our Earth, and then created us. This demiurge was undoubtedly malevolent. It was shown to create mankind as a mockery of the overarching omnipotent deity that had created the aeons, and it created man to basically become docile slaves. It isn't until the serpent, who's championed as something of a hero in some versions, and nudges humanity into eating from the tree, does mankind gain knowledge, and is thus freed from the demiurge's manipulative control. Indeed, traditional Christianity views this as the fall of mankind, whilst Gnosticism promoted it as something of a rise. The story is ultimately flipped on its head. The serpent was the liberator of mankind, and in some ways the protagonist, whilst God, the demiurge, was the villain, holding Adam and Eve prisoner in the garden until they wisen up to him. Some Gnostic Christians, such as the Marcionites, believe that the God of the Hebrew Bible was actually a false deity himself. From that perspective, it becomes deeply ironic that this very God is portrayed in the Old Testament as fiercely insistent that no other gods be worshipped. His repeated commands against idolatry and devotion to rival deities could be seen, through the Gnostic lens, not as righteous zeal, but as insecurity. Perhaps, they thought, this God protested so strongly because he feared being exposed for what he truly was, not the ultimate source of all things, but a flawed and self-deceived creator, desperately clinging to an authority that he did not rightfully possess. In Gnostic systems, like those of the Archontics, Sethians, and Ophis, this false god is often identified as Yaldabaoth. Once more, he is portrayed as the creator of the physical universe, but also a sort of cosmic jailer, who traps souls in their physical bodies and keeps them bound to a world of pain that he himself has fashioned. Interestingly, not all Gnostics viewed the creator of this material world as entirely evil. For example, the Valentinians believed the demiurge was not wicked, but simply ignorant and limited. In their view, he was more of an incompetent craftsman, doing his best to shape the world, but lacking the ability and the tools needed to sustain its goodness. It is from the Apocryphon of John, a second Gnostic text found amongst the Nag Hammadi scriptures, that we really get a more complete insight into how this early narrative was spun. The text opens with John expressing his grief and confusion in the aftermath of Christ's crucifixion. In this state of despair, the Saviour appears to him, taking on multiple forms. After calming John's fears, he begins to reveal a profound cosmological vision. At the heart of this vision is the monad, the highest divine principle. The monad is described as a monarchy with nothing above it, absolute, eternal, perfect, and self-sufficient. Yet despite these qualities, the monad is ultimately beyond comprehension, utterly ineffable. No words or measurements can truly capture his nature. He exists in a state of inconceivable perfection. From the monad's thoughts emerges Barbelo, a divine feminine presence referred to as the first thought and the image of the monad. Though consistently addressed as she, Barbelo embodies both masculine and feminine aspects. She is called the primordial mother and father, the first man, the Holy Spirit, and in some cases the mother-father, often described in terms of androgyny. Barbelo is the first of the aeons, divine emanations, and through her intimate exchanges with the monad, other aeons are brought into being. From the monad's contemplation of Barbelo also arise the divine attributes of light and mind. The light, identified with Christ, also known as Christ the Autogenes, and the mind continue the work of creation, glorifying and expanding upon the divine essence of the monad and Barbelo. Together, they give rise to additional aeons and spiritual powers. However, the harmony of this divine order is disrupted when one of the aeons, Sophia, attempts to create independently, without the consent of the monad or the participation of a male counterpart. Her unauthorized act of creation gives birth to Yaldabaoth, a flawed and arrogant being who becomes the first of a group of inferior demonic rulers known as the Archons. Yaldabaoth is depicted as grotesque in form, with the head of a lion and the body of a serpent. Shocked by the deformity of her creation, Sophia casts Yaldabaoth into a void and hides him away from the other Aeons, hoping to prevent them from discovering her mistake. As a result, Yaldabaoth grows up unaware of the higher realms and the divine beings above him, remaining ignorant of the world he was born from. As far as he is concerned, he is God, the only being in the void he was cast to, the known universe, if you will. Although Yaldabaoth was created by a single parent, Sophia, and without the consent of the spirit of the monad, he nonetheless possesses enough power to imitate the creative acts of the higher Aeons. In his arrogance, he generates a host of other beings known as the Archons, all of whom reflect his own flawed and deficient nature. He also fashions a realm for them to inhabit, a world that is fundamentally inferior to the divine realm above. This lower world is formed out of darkness, but is animated by a spark of light stolen from Sophia. The result is a reality that is neither fully dark nor truly illuminated, but rather dim and confused. In his ignorance and pride, Yaldabaoth describes himself as the one true God, jealous and alone in his dominion. Aware of the flawed nature of Yaldabaoth and the world he has created, Sophia repents. In response, the spirit of the monad, in an act of grace, joins with the Aeons and divine powers to redeem both Sophia and her misguided creation. During this redemptive effort, Yaldabaoth and the Archons hear the voice of the monad spirit echoing through the firmament, the waters that form the boundary of their realm. Though they are struck with fear, the echo leaves behind an imprint, a reflection of the spirit on the surface of the waters. Desiring to capture this divine power, they attempt to replicate the image. Their efforts result in the creation of the first human being, Adam. Recognizing a chance to reclaim the stolen light, Sophia and agents of the higher realm, the Pleroma, devise a clever plan. They deceive Yaldabaoth into breathing his own spiritual essence into Adam. This act simultaneously brings Adam to life and drains Yaldabaoth of the portion of his power that originated from Sophia. When Yaldabaoth and the Archons observe Adam's brilliance, intelligence, and superiority, they are filled with regret. Unable to destroy him, they try instead to contain him, placing him in what they present as the Garden of Eden. But in this version of the story, Eden is no paradise. It is a counterfeit haven, where the fruits of the trees represent sin, ignorance, confinement, and death. While Adam is given access to the Tree of Life, the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil is hidden from him. In Gnostic understanding, this tree is not forbidden out of love, but out of fear, for it represents the infiltration of higher liberating wisdom, that which would allow man to escape Yaldabaoth's realm. At this point in the vision, Christ tells John that it was he who inspired Adam to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Eve too is revealed to be a divine emissary, sent by the higher powers to aid in the liberation of the imprisoned light. She comes into being when Yaldabaoth tries to extract the light essence from Adam, inadvertently causing the formation of the female body. When Adam sees Eve, he recognizes in her a reflection of his own divine nature, which breaks Yaldabaoth's enchantment over him. What follows is Yaldabaoth's desperate attempt to regain control. His primary strategy is to initiate human reproduction, thereby populating the world with bodies that are infused not with true divine light, but with a counterfeit spirit. This false spirit serves as a tool of deception, keeping humanity ignorant of their divine origins and bound to the material world. It is the source of confusion, suffering, and spiritual blindness. Through it, Yaldabaoth ensures that many die without having found the truth. Gnostic beliefs vary thereafter, but some attempt to intertwine the acts of the Old Testament with that of Yaldabaoth, suggesting that whilst he had become aware that he was not the supreme being, and that there were entities like the Monad and Sophia above him, he still carried on as if he was the only god, and demanded that humanity reinforce this notion. Furthermore, he continued to strip humanity of that divine spark, the light he had unknowingly transferred to them, and to keep them enslaved within his dominion. Yet when humanity began rebelling on the earth, and either took up false idols, or chose not to worship him at all, Yaldabaoth punished them with the Great Flood. However, a feminine divine power, identified in different traditions as either Sophia or Pronoia, Providence, intervened and preserved Noah from destruction. Later, Yaldabaoth established a covenant with Abraham, binding both him and his descendants to serve him. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible were tasked with declaring Yaldabaoth's glory, yet under Sophia's subtle guidance, they also reminded the people of their higher spiritual origin and helped prepare the way for Christ's arrival. At Sophia's urging, Yaldabaoth unknowingly enabled the birth of Jesus through the Virgin Mary. He even appointed John the Baptist to herald his coming. Yet it was during Jesus' baptism, an event orchestrated by Yaldabaoth, that Sophia descended and entered into Jesus' body. From that point on, Sophia, through Jesus, revealed to humanity their true destiny, not to remain bound in the material realm, the so-called Kingdom of Darkness, but to return to the Kingdom of Light, their spiritual home. It was only after the baptism that Jesus was endowed with divine power and began to perform miracles, but instead of serving Yaldabaoth's kingdom, Jesus worked to dismantle it. In response, Yaldabaoth arranged for his crucifixion. Yet before the physical body was killed, Christ, understood here as the Divine Spirit, escaped from the material shell and returned to the spiritual realm. In examining the figure of Yaldabaoth within Gnostic cosmology, we are presented with more than a simple villain. We are confronted with a deeply complex being, whose story raises profound questions about God and how said God uses his power. Born of a solitary act, without guidance or awareness of the higher realms, Yaldabaoth believed himself to be the only god. In that ignorance, he acted as many of us might if granted unchecked authority. I mean, if you had the power to create a world, it's true that many of us would make ourselves the leader of that world and expect to be worshipped, or at least acknowledged for it. In this sense, Yaldabaoth becomes less a monstrous aberration, and more a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting the way we too may wield power when left in the dark. To be honest, Yaldabaoth is more of a reflection of us than say the Monad or Barbalo, because we aren't perfect and we are deeply flawed. After all, according to Gnostics, we were pretty much made in Yaldabaoth's image to some extent. It's no wonder then that our god is just as messed up as we are. One might find sympathy for Yaldabaoth, for he was a product of a cruel abandonment. In some ways, it's not really his fault that he is the way he is, because neither Sophia nor any of the Aeons really ever showed him a better way. In the same way we might not blame the neglected child for their behaviour, perhaps we might not blame Yaldabaoth for his actions in his infancy. Yet Yaldabaoth's tragedy shifts into tyranny when he learns the truth, that he is not alone, that there is a realm above his own, and the divine reality far greater than himself. Instead of seeking humility or reconciliation, he clings to power. He suppresses truth, subjugates humanity, and continues to masquerade as the sole god, not out of ignorance, but out of pride and fear of losing his dominion. It is in this conscious choice to deceive and enslave, even after enlightenment, that his evil is made manifest.